This is the wrap-up panel with department chairs. I should perhaps introduce myself. My name is Bill Carroll. I'm called Vice President of Industry Issues for Occidental Chemical Corporation in Dallas. I'm also chair of the board of the American Chemical Society, co-chair of the CSR, the Chemical Sciences Roundtable, and adjunct faculty at Indiana, but I want to tell you that none of those things actually qualifies me to know anything about education. So in standing here, I'm really more doing a job than offering an opinion. And the opinions, of course, will come from the people in the panel. I'd like to take a moment and introduce them to you as well. You have full bios in the printed material that you have, but I'd just like to point up the people sitting at the table. I'm going to do this not in the order that they're there, although maybe I can if I shuffle the papers. Mike Doyle is chair of the department at the University of Maryland. Previously, he's been vice president, then president of the Research Corporation and professor of chemistry at the University of Arizona, and has been at Maryland since 2003, correct? Miguel Garibay is at UCLA. He's a member of the editorial board of the Journal of the American Chemical Society and the Journal of Organic Chemistry, and also a CSR member. Sarah Green is from Michigan Tech on the scenic north coast of the United States, and also one of the most fascinating places to visit between November and March, which I've done. And also, she's a 2013 Jefferson Fellow, which means she's in town here advising the State Department, correct? Which will be a very interesting job, and thank you for your volunteerism on that. Now, Susan Ballistic is Dow Professor in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry at Ohio State. I don't know that Susan knows this, but she and I have quite a shared background in that she also graduated from DePauw University in Greencastle, Indiana, coming there 4 years after I left. And after a PhD, worked for Milo Novotny at Indiana, and I got my PhD there in '78, and you came about 4 years afterwards. So I'm really not going to try to draw much of a conclusion from that, other than to say there's certainly a shared background. Next is Jeff Reimer, and I have my notes here. Jeff is a professor in chemical engineering at UC Berkeley and faculty scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories, and has been awarded the Berkeley Distinguished Teaching Award in 2003. And then finally, down at the end of the table is Bill Tolman, who is a distinguished McKnight University professor from the University of Minnesota and is editor-in-chief of the ACS Journal Inorganic Chemistry. So you have quite a distinguished panel. At this point, I'm going to say something, and I want you to raise your hand if you recognize the reference from which the following question comes. What does it all mean, Mr. Natural? No one. No one lived through the 60s. No one read the R. Crumb comics. Exactly. Okay. So that's R. Crumb, Robert Crumb. So the question, that's in a way, that's a question for this panel, is what does it all mean, Mr. Natural? So let me ask you first of all, I'd like you to each take about 5 minutes or so and react to the things that you heard, put them in the context of your own experience, and perhaps we'll use that as a jumping off point for more discussion. And arbitrarily, Bill, I'm going to start down at your end of the table with you.
Okay, thank you. I guess the task, as I understood it, was to just sort of free associate on things that I heard that stuck for me. And I guess to summarize, I think I've heard a lot of really creative approaches from really dynamic, enthusiastic, and talented faculty who have put their hearts and minds into improving education. I think that's terrific. And we've seen a lot of different approaches. I think that these new cutting-edge approaches don't always result in discernible or easily discernible improvements, but it is clear in my mind that that kind of enthusiasm and talent applied is great, and it's got to be an improvement, even if we can't discern it necessarily. Another message that I took came from Susan Hickson's discussion yesterday, that I think we need to take advantage of missed opportunities to embed these kinds of talks and these kinds of things in other places. I'm sitting here listening to all these really fascinating things, thinking about what I'm going to take back, what I'm going to tell my colleagues, and I realize, oh, I have to go tell my colleagues. And, there's 40 of them, and, those 40 need to hear these things, and they're not. And so I'm really interested in the idea of getting this out there more broadly. I think that's something that we need to work on. Her idea that she mentioned about embedding these kinds of talks in research journals and conferences, there's all sorts of problems with that I see, but I still think that that's something we should be talking about and trying to spread the word. I have some specific thoughts and recommendations, but I'll save that for later.
Good.
But that's the general impression that I get.
Very good. Thanks, Bill. Jeff?
I'm just tremendously privileged to be a part of a community like this. The talks I've heard so far just affirm to me what a great community of scholars we are, what a wonderful discipline chemistry is. And it's just fantastic, these grand new experiments that you all are trying are really thrilling and uplifting, and I am very excited to be able to go back and tell them to my colleagues at Berkeley. I was surprised and pleased to hear that your industry folks did not think that the chemistry education needs to be redone. I was excited to find that they are really looking for a fine-tuning of the experience to include multiple intelligences. And I think that's a really great message for us. The new courses, the new experiments you're doing, and the new approaches, like I said, I'm very excited to be able to take them back to my colleagues. And Ann Berenger is now my colleague. And so I'm really looking forward to that very much. There are some challenges about conversions of these things to best practices, and in particularly Tom's phrase, private empiricism. I love that expression. I'm going to keep that in my brain for a while. The private empiricism that's going on throughout our community somehow needs to be built into something that's part of the legitimate scholarly enterprise, and I'll say more about that a little later, perhaps.
Very good. Susan?
Sure. So two things that came through in the discussions of these outstanding talks in the last few days in my mind were basically reminding ourselves that student-driven activities are really the way we're going to improve our instruction. Many of us are working hard on many different levels to try to get that to go, but as we work hard on this, we have to keep reminding ourselves that we need to be the facilitators and not the doers of this work, and this type of these many different types of activities keep that focus in our minds. Another activity that yesterday that was particularly poignant to me is Angelica's work, in where she pointed out how even though we're doing all of this great work with different types of use of technology, looking in classrooms, et cetera, pay attention to matching the exams to the new type of work that you're doing. You absolutely have to do that. We have lots of activities happening at our place too, but I think that's a place where we need to really focus heavily, because I think that's a hole that I see that we need to work on ourselves. So another third activity that I just wanted to finish with is that it's clear in listening to the last day and a half, as I think all of us in the room are starting to recognize, that there is incredible power that's starting to assemble in the changes that people want to make in teaching chemistry, and I'm really quite thankful that this is finally happening. The world of the biological sciences have been, and even physicists have been moving faster on these fronts than we have, and it's really great that the chemists are assigning themselves to this task at a higher level now. So I think this is just absolutely outstanding, and I look forward to the complexity of this, because I think it's going to take us 10 years to really get to where we need to be. But I think the people in this room are rather committed, and we will move this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Sarah?
I'm going to take off on that, because I had also written down timescales. Timescales are of change of this magnitude are in years and semesters at the most, and it's very hard to do multiple experiments but we need to change much faster than that. So I hope we can do it in sooner than a decade. I was struck a lot by the real emphasis on multidisciplinary teams, hands-on, solving real problems, integrating disciplines, and also by the creativity, both by the faculty and people who are teaching these courses and developing new ideas, and by the students given a chance to be creative. They are, and that really the conservative elements are the system, and that includes the system that allows people to do these creative things, and the system of assessment and evaluation, and the system that students are used to. I think Angie did a good job about that, with that, about how we can be motivated to change. And in a way, I can take off of Jim Anderson's comment, I'm part of the problem of the teaching, and say, well, if historical methods of teaching were so great, then why are we in the mess we are in globally in terms of science and application of science? And I'll stop there.
Very good. Thank you. Sarah Miguel?
Okay, so I guess I had an advantage that many members of this panel didn't have. I started to think about this about a year ago. That doesn't mean that my opinions are going to be any better or more insightful, however. But trying to look at the whole picture and considering some of the big picture issues, the PCAST perspective and things like that, I'm trying to think, what is it how do we formulate this problem? And I'm thinking that, what we're trying to reflect is that perhaps we want to see a student as an agent who adds value to knowledge, right? So that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with people that will need to receive or learn something to produce something even better. So they're agents of knowledge. So they're expected to produce innovations. They're going to be the creators of they're going to solve the problems of the future, Scott reflected and also we heard before. But some of them will be innovators in chemistry. Some of them will be innovators in other disciplines. So there will be the experts, and there will be more the users that apply our discipline. And I've seen that those two levels have been dealt with to several extents today. One of the things that I think several people express is that when we look at the experts, we're actually doing a pretty good job. We can look at ourselves and see we came out okay. We're doing a reasonable job as a community, right? The experts are fine. But we have a big issue. That is that in the process of trying to train experts, we're losing too many people, right? We have many, many losses. The people who go from the physical sciences, from the chemical sciences into sometimes as far as they can into the humanities and social sciences. And I think that's something that is still a challenge for us. In terms of the people who use the discipline, I think we have some really good things. Jeff Moore talked about, courses for non-majors, and so that's that issue that we have been addressing to some extent. But I didn't hear a lot about general education, about educating the humanities, the social sciences, and I think that's something that we really should not forget, right? I don't know if they're going to be part of the ABLE group that are going to help in this, science and technology and engineering, but that's something I think we need to consider. And I was very excited and impressed about hearing about the very integrative, interdisciplinary approaches to make, chemistry more relevant to other disciplines. I heard about assessment, and I just realized, really, the product that you get is what you will assess, right? And I think that's a really profound thought. And so what do we use? We use student satisfaction as the major assessment tool, right? So the students like us. Why do they like us? Because exams are easy, because we tell them, very concrete amount of information that they can regurgitate. So I think, the assessment is a challenge that we still need to work on. Peer evaluation helps a little bit. I was very excited and to see some of the results of online assessing. I thought that was really very insightful. And finally, when I, like everybody else, I think that we've had some incredible innovation here today and the work of some very inspired and dedicated colleagues who have done amazing work. And so, how do we bring that to a big contest, right? So I thought, well, maybe we can look at it as a technological revolution that we would like to bring in. And so, Angie also mentioned this, that if you look at this perspective from innovation to product, there is development. And it looks like if we look at it that way, we're missing development. So how do we take the science paper that's just an innovation and make it into the final product? I think that's how she put it. But you can also look at it as a scientific revolution, right? A scientific revolution would happen not when everybody agrees to do something different, but when those of us who used to do it one way begin to retire and pass away, and the new generation does it differently.
That's I know here.
So what I'm trying to say here is that perhaps we should focus also, and I think we've touched on that, on that we really need to train our younger colleagues and our TAs in a new mode about how we perceive chemical education, undergraduate education. It could be that at the end this is going to evolve in the model of survival of the fittest, right? That the obsolete will just kind of disappear, and those of us who come up with good solutions will flourish and evolve. So, I don't know.
Thank you, Miguel. And just as a hygiene issue, I'm going to ask you to turn your mic off, Sarah, because sometimes you can only have a certain number on at the same time. Mike?
Especially when I'm talking, Bill.
Which is really important. It's really important.
I want to take advantage of 45 years that I've spent in higher education, 29 at undergraduate institutions and the last 16 at the research universities, and express that consideration that I've lived through that time period where higher education was there to prepare careers for STEM majors in the 1960s. In the 1980s, 70s were a pretty bad time, but the 1980s were a time of new experimentation, and in that we had the beginnings of discovery-based learning. We had the initiation of peer-to-peer search learning. Now we're in another era of experimentation, and that experimentation is taking us to a view of lower cost, less interaction, less personal interaction education. That could be the flipped classroom, it could be the MOOCs, it could be other venues for education. But they are taking us away from that original view of education as being a master-apprentice relationship, one that was formulated to some extent in a number of different initiatives. We do also understand that students have their motivation for taking a course in chemistry in a number of different ways. It is for their career. It is an expectation for anyone who has taught the pre-med students. That is a very important courses to be able to take and get high grades in. It is important for those who find that a requirement for their particular discipline or career development. It is important for those students that they have some basis to rely on, usually a textbook, and we have a textbook industry that has prospered over the years based on that student lack of confidence that they could actually get this by a multitude of methods. Now, I look back and I say, what if we had actually influenced a lot of these things? What if the Division of Undergraduate Education at the NSF had spent money on multiple textbooks that had emphasized interdisciplinary activities in the 1980s and 1990s instead of investing in individual institutions and initiatives that were coming from those? What if the Committee on Professional Training had professed interdisciplinary as their mode of approach instead of the subdisciplinary equity that actually existed in the 1980s and 1990s? What if research as a initiation of students to potential of understanding problem solving and careers in the sciences had moved from a time period that was the capstone experience of a student to a freshman experience that allowed the freshmen to actually start looking at these things? All of these are really unanswered questions that we are now in a period of trying to assess. Now, what if we did any of the things that were being presented to us in the workshop? What if that was a framework that we look upon 20 years from now as being a formative program for this? Do we have the knowledge now to understand which one it is and which one we should put all our eggs in? And do we have the resources nationally and institutionally to be able to implement any more than one at any one time? So I'm going to stop with that as a challenge to our illustrious leader.
I see. So I guess the last 2 minutes was nothing but questions, Mike. I didn't write them all down. But thank you all very much. Let me tell you how I'd like to use about the next 35 minutes. I want to have some interaction with the panel. I have some questions prepared. I have a couple of that will come from the audience, and depending, I may ask for questions from you. Then I have what I'd like to call the 2-minute drill. When we get to about 11:40, I'd like each member of the panel to take no more than 2 minutes to say, here's what we should do in those terms, your opinion. And then I want to do an experiment with those of you in the audience. I want you to, as you're listening to this, think about something that you could contribute no longer than a tweet. So it's essentially one sentence, 140 characters, and I'm going to pass the handheld around. And I want one sentence from you to react to what you've heard or to contribute to the discussion. And I wanted to warn you beforehand so you have the opportunity to think about that. Are we okay with the program? Let's go ahead and go. My question for the panel is, and I've heard differing opinions on this, has the case been made for change in chemistry education or not? I've heard some discussion that yes, it's good that no major change is needed. I've heard also the idea that we've seen lots of experimentation that suggests transformative change is needed. Who wants to take a piece of this? Change or no? Okay, Susan and Sarah.
So I think the case for change has long since been made in all of sciences. Nationally, I think the retention rate in most science departments of students walking in the door who says, yes, I'm interested in doing a science career is about 35%, something like that. Our institution is very close to that number. We also bring in our average student at Ohio State has an ACT score of above 28. That's an 85 percentile, above 85 percentile nationally. But I can tell you that I've looked at the data. We are not retaining any more of those students, even though the quality of the students coming into our place continues to increase. And so it just seems to be an incredible travesty to me to have students walking in the door who devoutly believe that they want to be science majors, a lot of them chemistry majors, who walk out the door with something that's not a STEM major. It's a huge loss for the nation.
So we're driving them off, Susan?
I am convinced that I agree with Sarah. The innovations that we're doing are spectacular. It's the institutional structures that's the problem. It has to be. Very good. Sarah and then Mike.
I think the students are going to drive change because right now we have such an evolving smorgasbord of opportunities for them. If they don't like the way we're teaching in our institution, they go to a community college or they go to a MOOC or they go somewhere else. So the possibilities for shopping around for students, they're gonna vote with their feet and with their dollars for that.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
They're gonna vote with their feet or with their dollars or with their dollar savings by going to these online things. The fact that you can get 30,000 students registered for an online course in a very difficult subject is evidence that there's a need out there.
Mike?
I want to tell you about a program at the University of Maryland, not in chemistry but in engineering. About 15 years ago, the engineering college looked at the 5-year graduation rate of its students and found that only 38% were actually finishing within that period of time. They instituted a program called the Gemstone Program, which brought together a cohort of about 40 students and one faculty member volunteering first and then served as an honor program after a few years into that program to actually take that cohort of students through their first 2 years and then follow them through the rest of the time. Out of that are the information that has come forward from this is that now 68%, not 38%, 68% of students finish their programs within the 5-year period of time, indicating that personal touch, that personal interaction remains a primary determinant on a student's success.
So I'm hearing essentially 3 votes for the need to change. Who'd like to make the opposite case? Bill?
I don't want to make the opposite case. I just want to maybe refine.
Oh, come on now. I asked the question
almost,
here.
It's almost the opposite. So I guess I haven't heard the case for necessarily fundamental, large-scale institutional change. I mean, in my thinking, teaching is always a process of revising and trying to improve, because we're always, all of us who teach see failures every day in our teaching and are trying to become better. And this is something that this whole process is part of, is I think a natural evolution of what teaching should always be, is a process of change and how we deliver things. You know, is the number of people that were graduating with degrees too high or too low? I don't know. I heard mixed evidence. I'm not sure I'm convinced one way or the other. Should we be doing a better job of educating the public in science? Absolutely. That's clearly a huge problem. Should we be changing the way we teach whole course, you know, and completely as a result of the pressures that I'm hearing about? I'm not convinced. I'm not sure I see the huge drivers that I was convinced yesterday of, huge drivers pushing us to large-scale major change. So there you go.
Okay, well, Bill, you're off the hook for the next question then. No, we actually allow diversity of opinion here. All right, Miguel. And then I want to follow up.
Right. So there's one perspective that we haven't really talked about, which is the cost of education. And in institutions like mine, a large public institution, the cost of education is so high, it's incredible, it's unsustainable. And what's the cost of education is faculty. It is us. Our system is kind of broken in that respect. So what that means is that we need to rethink the paradigm. You know, how do we engage this very expensive faculty whose function has been to bring, you know, grant money and produce research, to be now engaged on what's slowly becoming a more important portion of the enterprise of this institution. So I think cost in the end will be a very important driver for many of the changes. So how you?
And I want to follow up on that. But I want to hold that idea just for a second.
Sure.
Because for those of you who've made the case for change, Bill, you're off the hook on this one. For those of you who've made the case for change, I assume you also mean in your own departments. You are department chairs. How do you drive change in your department?
So let me just say something about that. 1 second. So we are doing all of these things in our department. We have a MOOC in our department. We have online sections. We have active learning class. We have a whole building next to us that's filled with active learning classrooms, and we use them all the time for all these methodologies. We are constantly doing all of these things I've heard today in various forms or another throughout our entire department. So I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing any of those things. I'm talking about the large-scale institutional change of our whole system. I'll say one thing about the cost thing. I mean, I think that's a really important issue, but I think the way to address it is not by saying that we need to get rid of faculty. I think we just need to focus on what is value added. Mm-hmm. So what can we bring to the table that is unique, that students are not going to get online through MOOCs?
Let me see. So should I be surprised that the chair of the department is not wanting to eliminate faculty? That doesn't surprise me. I'm just checking. But
we do a lot of things, including research, teaching, service to the community, outreach, and we have far fewer faculty than we need to address the pressure of the STEM flow of students into our university and department. So I don't want to get rid of faculty, no.
But I want to go back to the idea of how you make change happen. And if you saw something here or other places where you wanted to take that to the department and drive that change, how do you individually as chairs do that? Jeff?
You have to practice what you preach. When I talk to my colleagues and tell them that I want to have an active learning classroom, I have to engage that, I have to do it, I have to show it's successful, and I can bring that, give the word testimony to my colleagues. So if I'm doing what I preach, it makes my voice far more effective. Second of all, not only do I have to do what I preach, I have to make sure it's successful so that I can demonstrate quantitatively with some assessment tool that the changes I've made have made a difference. And so I think credibility is a really important tool for driving change.
Others? I see heads nodding. How do you sell that change, Sarah?
So you have to, somebody mentioned champions. You really have to find and identify the champions in the department who can take this on, and you have to support and reward them. And in the case of pre-tenure faculty, you have to defend them against the pressures to do only what's listed on the bullet points on the tenure forms. You have to go to the administration and push back on changing the culture. We have had a lot of talk about culture among senior faculty about, well, they're not doing it the way I do. How are their assessments, their student evaluations? When you do something different, no matter what you do that's different, the student evaluations plummet first time. I think Angie demonstrated that students being made to think. They don't like it at first. It's hard. So you have to really find and find people who can make that change and defend them and support them.
Okay, so now here's one of those behavioral interview questions like we heard discussed yesterday. Pick an example of a time you drove change through your department, how it happened, and how successful you were. Bill, do you want to try that?
Well, I think the example in our department is our initiatives on the safety culture, and that was a major change in our department. And that was initiated by an email from one of my graduate students, ex-graduate students working in a company, who sent me a link to the Chemical Safety Board video about the accidents at Texas Tech and UCLA. I watched the video, my heart dropped, and then I went to the faculty and I edited the video down to 8 minutes because I knew their attention span was no longer than 10. And I showed the video at a faculty meeting, and that's how we started. And you could hear a pin drop in that after that faculty meeting, and I knew I had them, and we could go with our safety initiative. So that's the way I did it.
You know, it's interesting. One of the premier advertising and public relations geniuses of the late 20th century, Dick Worthland, used to say, "Persuade with facts and motivate with emotion." And in a way, I think you got the motivation with emotion using that video. Anyone else like to give an example? Go ahead, Jeff.
So you can manipulate your colleagues to discover the right conclusion. So somebody mentioned yellow stickers on the wall. I'm not sure, was it Michael, was it you, or who was that? Ah, there, right. So you have a plan in mind. In this case, it was how to deploy the faculty in teaching a curriculum in a balanced way, because we were previously dysfunctional. So I arranged for people to have a democratic dialogue based around stickers and so forth. And I knew exactly where the conclusion was going to lead to. And then when I had the people behind me, then I could affect change. And they felt like they discovered it themselves.
Very good. Next, there would be your persuading with facts. So, Miguel, I want to return to your question about cost. In his book, The Innovator's Dilemma, Clayton Christensen described the disruptive innovation. And the classic example of the disruptive innovation is something that happens at the low-quality end of the spectrum that also is a low-cost innovation that people flock to because the market has been abandoned. And what's more, it's good enough. Is chemistry education at any level ripe for that kind of disruptive innovation, which, and I'm going to key off your cost question, which is low cost and good enough?
Well, you know,
to which in fact, people will flock because it serves the need.
So administrators are tempted to just create more positions that are not, you know, ladder type, right? So not tenure track, lecturer positions, and properly done that works well is probably less expensive than a tenure track position, but it tends to create tension in many places where that is practiced. Rarely that is practiced with great success. One model that I've been thinking about and we're trying to begin to explore is the concept of a teacher scholar, which is more than a postdoctoral position, but it's not a tenure track position. It's a temporary position that allows somebody who is interested in an academic position to be engaged and be part of an academic community that can then step into an independent career somewhere. But that's, again, a temporary solution, so I don't think that's going to be, sufficient. low-cost solutions basically would be just to deliver more education with the same resources, and I think technology is capable of helping with that, and technology will be expensive initially, but then it will be paid for.
Anyone else? Bill? And Mike.
I think we're experiencing the disruptive technology right now, the disruption of our MOOCs. It is disrupting everything. It's cheap, well, sort of.
Well, that's not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing a lot of resources that go into making it.
That's true, but the argument, of course, will be that once you've made it, it carries forward, and at the end of the day, it's going to be cheaper. Whether or not it's cheaper or not, it is disruptive, and it is disrupting the way everyone is thinking. So that is the disruptive technology. You have it in front of you. Now, how do we respond to it is the question, right?
I have Mike and then Sarah.
We in looking at change, we make the mistake of sometimes thinking that it is in our hands. Too many of the organizations that control the lives of our students have requirements in chemistry that are inhibitory for any meaningful change, other than the electronic changes that we're now seeing that actually follow the same framework. For example, a wave of despair goes through any chemistry community, especially organic chemists, when the MCAT exam is threatened to lose organic chemistry. I mean, and because that affects a vast array of our students. Unless we actually partner with these, understand what we have, our movement towards that interdisciplinary goal that I think we all share is going to be very difficult.
Very good. Sarah?
Well, Bill took the words out of my mouth with the MOOCs, but I think that there's both a disruptive change and a challenge and possibilities there. So imagine that you can, and you could now, if you took the time, put together a course just by picking and choosing YouTube videos or edX or whatever from different places and sticking them together and handing that to the students. So, and students are doing this. Students who are not in your class are watching these things outside of class. But there are advantages, and I think we have to take advantage of the fact that this frees up all these faculty who we don't want to lose, who are doing the creative work, who are doing the research, to do more one-on-one and individual student interactions. And so we need to think about what it is that they are a threat. Okay, you can say, and I think Thomas Edison famously said when he invented the movie projector that this is going to make education obsolete or teachers obsolete because everybody will just watch a movie. And that hasn't happened with each stage that we go. People said that when the web was invented, which, remember, was only 20 years ago. So the trick is to take the good parts of this and use that to our advantage to take better advantage of faculty time.
Go ahead, Jeff, and I don't want to switch to another question.
So the game changer, to me, is the MOOC is a response to the game changer. The game changer is the adoption of the neoliberal political philosophy, which takes higher education to a private commodity as opposed to a public good. That's what I see as the game changer.
Interesting observation. So now I want to turn to industry, and so I have a little bit of experience there. And I want to take some of the things that we've heard and put them together and ask you the following question. What you heard from the industry panel was that industry is still interested in mastery and depth, but at the same time is looking for what I think was called technological flexibility in the ability to do a number of things. Now, over the course of the last couple of days, we've heard a number of approaches to putting the traditional education in context, and that is, say, either blending it with other disciplines or doing things in different ways. Can we do both? Can we take real-world problems the way it's been expressed with, but at the same time get to the same depth and mastery that people seem to be asking for in our students? And if so, how? Miguel?
My answer is I think it is possible, but it's not possible in every single instance. So, I think that the greatest value that we can provide with education in context is we talked about it several times, the process of acquiring information, analyzing information, and transforming with that information. I think we really need to come out of the paradigm that we are providers of that information. The information is in the web, it's in the books, it's everywhere. So it doesn't make any sense to have all of that information stored in our brains. So we don't need the depth in terms of that information, but we need the strategic knowledge to be able to use the information that is available everywhere. So in that context, I think we just need to be good users of the process that will help us process that information. So I think it is perfectly possible, but it requires a bit of a change of a paradigm in the way we perceive. So it doesn't mean to be an expert to know the pKa of 50 compounds. The expert knows what to do with the pKa of that compound when he or she found it on the web or whatever it is. So, different paradigms.
I see you wanting to get in here, and then I have Mike.
So I think Jim Anderson's course and the course, the icons, capstones are information that seems to say that we're going to be able to do this. Obviously, they don't have the type of data they want yet to document this to the country, but it looks real. I think the issues that both of them were describing is that you got to pay really close attention to how you're teaching and that you continue to look at depth. But obviously, both courses are doing that, and I think it looks very well done. So I think it's clear that this can happen.
Thank you, Mike.
In the late 1980s and early 1990s, and experiments were done nationwide. Probably the best known of that is Priscilla Law's experiments in physics education coming out of Dickinson College. And they basically said, remove the lecture, and instead of that, have students develop the laws of physics and the understanding of physics through experimentation. Discover it yourself. The problem with that, as Priscilla would amply point out, is that you can't cover as much. So what is the outcome? Outcome is the students who are coming through that program do less well on the MCAT exam or do less well on the GRE exam. So if we do an experiment, there has to be a balance of how we're going to be able to make it of benefit and look at the implication of any massive change in order to actually make sure that we can have something come through effectively.
So let me key off of that. I'm going to hold my other industry question. I'm still going to get it in, but I want to key off of that. How do we know that we actually are educating better scientists by doing it in a new way? I guess in a way that's, I'm stalling for you now. I guess in a way that's the assessment question. Bill, I can see you want in here.
Well, I mean, I think right, and I'm not an expert in assessment. I mean, that's part of the problem. Most of us research faculty who dabble in teaching, who are not teaching experts, we don't know a lot about assessment. We're told to do it, and we don't really learn about it, and I think that's a real issue. Assessment is key. We've heard problems with it. It's a really interesting problem, and I think we need to learn more about it.
And I'll take it one step further and say when I'm asking the question, I'm not just asking about what you get at the end of the course. I'm saying if you look back 5 years after people have graduated under the new paradigm, how will you know if we've done the right things?
So I think that's an easy answer. It's whether industry and the users are going to be happy with the product. Every student I've ever seen come out of a course that's an interdisciplinary deep science class or an active learning class, those students are at least as good, if not better, than the students who were in the canned class. So we have to pay attention to what we're doing, but I think it's going to be just fine.
And I'll, go ahead, Jeff.
A very simple metric. We know we've done a good job and our curriculum is better if the people who leave our curriculum don't look like me.
I won't, no rejoinder for that, particularly, but I'll tie it back to the flexibility that was asked for by the industry panel. I think one of the ways you'll know is if the students that you graduate under a new paradigm are able to learn themselves when they get out into the environment and adapt and do new things in a better way and can supply themselves the depth, which frankly I think is where you were going with your comment, Susan. So let me just stick with one other industry question. You heard the discussion about tried to put various names on, but I'll go back to Scott's transferable skills, and we all know what we're talking about here. How do you teach those things to your students if it's not being done now? If there's a gap, what approach would you use to fill that gap in terms of speaking, writing, interpersonal interactions, those kinds of things? Thoughts? Bill?
Well, I have an answer, but it's going to be my 2-minute recommendation.
Oh, okay,
so
well, then why don't you save it for that? Anyone else?
So I think project-based learning environments are the ways to handle that. The students work on defined projects they want to go after. They have to write detailed descriptions of what they're going to do. There's lots of writing in this. There's presentations. It combines science, it combines writing, it combines presentation. It's all there.
Mm-hmm. Miguel?
I think just basically any academic activity that is not a lecture.
Not bad, Mike?
I was going to say, the one characteristic of the sciences, especially the chemical sciences, that actually is irreducible to any other discipline is the laboratories. The laboratories are that sequence on which you do depend on writing, you do depend on experiment, you do depend on knowledge. It is that active learning venue. All of the rest can be turned into another form of education, but our laboratories cannot.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I think it's really important that our curriculum maintain a base in the liberal arts. I think creative arts, expressive arts are essential to our students. They need to be reading Gabriel Garcia Marquez and others and be able to talk about that. And if we make our students technocrats, we do them a disservice.
Thank you. I would be remiss if at this point I didn't go back to our alma mater, which only gives a BA degree. So each of us graduated with a technical degree, but a Bachelor of Arts degree, and I didn't take advantage of the liberal arts the way I should have. But this is the last opportunity that those students are going to have to fill in all the stuff that gives it context. All right, so let me ask just one other question, and then we'll go to the 2-minute drill, and then it's going to be your responsibility. Of the things that you've seen that individuals have brought forward as ways that they do things, their innovations. In general, do you believe those innovations are scalable? Could they be implemented in more places than the place they grew up? And if so, what's it going to take? Bill?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the answer is yes. I mean, if they can do it, so can I. Come on. Come on. We all believe that. So I believe that all these innovations are totally doable. What's it going to take is the kind of education. I mean, you need to get a bunch of faculty who want to do it, and they have to want to do it, and so they need to learn about it. And so that, to me, that's the fundamental reason why I brought up Susan Hickson at the very beginning, is I think we've got to get our faculty knowing about this stuff, because when they hear it, they're going to go, oh, I can do it. I mean, Jeff Moore's done it. I can do better than Jeff. And right? And that's exactly what you want, right? That's exactly what you want, and I think totally it's doable.
Others? Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm just thinking of the leverage that the Dreyfus Foundation and NSF have been able to bring to a lot of these issues. I think it's definitely scalable, and if we have foundations like that are continuing to incentivize, even just to a small amount, these innovations, I think we can do this broadly.
Others? I'm hearing a lot of optimism on this. Go ahead, Sarah.
So the peer-to-peer thing, peer-to-peer tutoring was just almost starting when I started at Michigan Tech, and there was resistance to it, and now it's just sort of expected that all classes involve a little bit at least, or allow something, and it's very heavily used in our first-year courses. So things can propagate. Maybe it shouldn't take 20 years, but it happens.
So basically, it really kind of comes down to that old riddle: how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is just one, but the light bulb has to want to change. So let's go ahead and start the 2-minute drill, and I want to start down at the other end of the table this time, Mike. So you got 2 minutes. Recommendations. What do we need to do?
A number of years ago, I had occasion to talk with a person who had been the president of 2 major universities in this country, not at the same time, but at different times. He had left the position of being the president of a very large university whose population had been about 45,000. And I asked the question, how many students really should be there? out of that 45,000? And he said, probably 15,000, because 15,000 came there for an education. The rest came there for another reason. I think that's part of our problem in dealing with what we need to do in our process. We have so many students that are taking our courses that we're fixated on how to actually spread the word to the vast array of students. What do we need to do to give that information to the students who really need it and will use it in their lifetime? We don't know the answer to that question.
Thank you. And also, and something else you identified there is if we have people being presidents of 2 universities, significant cost saving there. Miguel, 2 minutes.
Okay. Well, I think whatever solution we come up is going to be one that is going to require more for less. So we need to be economic. We do have a very desirable product, most of us do. And in my own institution, our enrollments have increased significantly, and there is a plan to have an increase up to 25% from out-of-state and international students, because we have a product that has a high value. So we need to make sure that the faculty realizes that and that the attitude basically matches that expectation. And given that faculty are the most expensive component of this product, we just need to make the contact with the faculty one of the highest possible quality, not the monologue of the lecture, but figure out how to use technology and have that interaction with students.
Sarah?
Perfect segue. I was going to say we need to reward all the things that Miguel just said in the tenure system, in supporting new faculty. They have all of these creative ideas. Many of them are just straining to try them, but they feel constrained by the system. And so allow experiments and help them. One of the frustrations I've seen when they do try experiments is that faculty surprisingly have psychology like everybody else, and they don't like to fail, just like students don't like to fail. So let that experimentation happen and encourage the interdisciplinary efforts.
Very good. Susan?
So I think I have similar opinions as Sarah. Interdisciplinary science education is where I think the country needs to be. The type of work like Jim Anderson is showing, the type of work like ICON and others that are happening at all of our universities should be strongly supported by the universities. The university structure often is in the way of that. Department budgets, college budgets get in the way of actively instructing our students in ways that get them ready for society. And I absolutely disagree that we should avoid instructing a substantial amount of our students. All of these students are going to be voters someday. We want them to be science literate. And so we shouldn't say that of our 60,000 students, only 15,000 should be there. We need to make sure that as many of the 60,000 students are going to be science literate after they finish their 4-year degree. That's our job. So interdisciplinary instruction, like you saw Jim show and like you saw Scott show, that's the path, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Susan. Jeff?
So I have 3 things that I think we should do next. First of all of you need to become leaders at your institution so that you can affect the changes that are needed. So Professor Moore, Professor Seema, the 2 of you need to become deans. Like my colleague Angie Stacy in the back of the room is a perfect example of someone who's gone up in the university to affect change with leadership. The leadership role is important, and you all can do that, and that's one way to affect change. The second item I would have is that I would really like to see the MOOC equivalent of a lab experience. And that would be really cool if we could imagine a way in which experiential chemistry was safe, realizable, and assessed. I think that's a really interesting challenge intellectually. And then the last thing I think for our institutions and for our greater community is given the changes in enrollment and the pressures we have, I would like us to see a study confront and solve the problem of adolescence in the classroom. Because all my students are very, very smart, and many don't succeed. And to a large extent, that's due to the fact that they're adolescents. And they're paying a lot of money to experience that. And I would really like to see our community come to some sort of study and resolution of that problem.
Thank you, Jeff. Bill?
I guess mine resonates with Jeff's middle selection. I heard from the industrial folks yesterday that they want their employees to have good communication skills, be able to work in teams, and have inculcated a really great safety culture. We've seen that MOOCs are on the rise, and in terms of delivering content for low cost to large numbers of people, that's putting a great pressure on universities. So I would argue that the change or the thing that we need to focus on is the lab. That's the special thing that we can offer as a value as a university that a MOOC can't take away from us, and that we should be looking at doing things in our labs that inculcate teamwork, cooperation, safety culture, all those things the industrial people want. For instance, I'll give one quick example. In our Gen Chem labs now, they work in teams of 4 the entire time doing discovery-based experiments. So that's our entire Gen Chem, and we're talking thousands of students all doing that in teams. I think that's the sort of thing where we can have a really big impact and deal with all these issues.
That's a significant change right there. Thank you all on the panel, and now it's your turn. And I'm going to warn you, I'm starting with you. So here's how I'd like to do this, and we'll see how it goes. I'm going to pass the microphone around. When the microphone comes to you, 1-sentence reaction, no more than 15 seconds. If you don't have something you want to say, it's okay to pass it to the next person, but the hallmark of this is we're going to need to get through this part of it in no more than the next 7 minutes. So let's roll.
Okay, I think the idea of engaging the students in real-world problems is extremely exciting, but the problem is how do we scale it up beyond 130 students, for example, at UMass?
Great.
Yeah, so I think that the things we've heard have given us the opportunity to enhance the education of the best students, who are always going to succeed, but perhaps now they're coming up with a new skill set or an additional skill set, but also get the attention of the average student, who's going to be the majority of the population in the future.
Great, thank you.
I think we need to develop a new online gen ed course that's interdisciplinary, that meets our science ed requirement and satisfies our administration.
Wonderful, thank you. Don?
We've heard a lot about change. I think that Susan Hickson's talk yesterday says we should also remember we've got 20 years of great work at NSF, a lot of institutional experience that we should draw on. So.
Thank you. Luis?
I took your tweet suggestion literally. You can't do great cheap.
Yes, we can. John?
Support departments implementing new educational paradigms and hire their students.
Thank you, John. Joel?
I think we need to identify common outcomes so that we can accelerate these innovative ideas beyond a generation in time, so that accelerate beyond 20 years.
We have to remember that the job of education is education, and we need to emphasize student-centered approaches, which we've heard a lot about for the preparation and retention of students.
Great, thank you. Jim?
First, thank you to everybody. Second, the world is changing so rapidly that the nation's future depends on scientific literacy.
Thank you. Emilio?
I don't think that the system is not working, but everything that I heard today and yesterday made me think that we should combine the two approaches and keep developing. Jim's program and others are excellent, but we need the rest solid education.
Very good. Ken?
Teaching students to be able to read a newspaper article in a scientifically critical manner is the most important thing you can give them.
Mike?
A lot of exciting experiments employing things like active learning, context motivation, and utilizing technology. We want to make sure that we can try to assess the impacts of each one rather than all of them agglomerated.
We need to make sure that there's a bonus system or something to incentivize teaching, like research has been incentivized by the NSF. We need to do something to motivate faculty to change.
Pass. If an innovation isn't working, we have to have the courage to kill it and move on to something else.
Great point. Angie?
I think we need to apply the scientific method to our classrooms, making hypotheses, observations, and determining outcomes and revising based on those.
To echo a little bit that and the comment that was made earlier, there's a lot of evaluation and research of instructional methods that have been developed previously, And it's really important to be aware of that work and to build on it rather than to reinvent the wheel. And so I think we need to have a better awareness of the previous work that's happened.
Thank you.
Through metacognition, I've determined that I don't have anything I'd like to add to this discussion.
Lisa?
I would like to see us look at the cohort of current faculty that are serving in adjunct positions and the true scholarship that they can really bring to this field that we're not taking advantage of well currently.
Good point.
Miles Fabian, NIGMS. The problems we do face today are difficult, and so I applaud anything that gets students to be more collaborative, speak better, communicate their science, and write better.
Great. Thank you, Miles.
I think for the research schools, especially research-oriented school, for the untenured faculty, we need some more exposure to this education problem.
Thank you.
I think the issues of retention and as an outcome and scientific literacy are really keys in this endeavor.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michelle Mcleod with the Annenberg Foundation. I think the interaction is really the key, and this idea of helping students think like teachers and teachers being lifelong students is also important in the attitude.
Great idea. Thank you, Jody.
We want to tap into the community both within and I think outside of the American Chemical Society and other organizations. Look at the literature, design principles, strategies, and leadership development.
David.
To catalyze and implement widespread change, the community colleges need a seat at the table.
One size doesn't fit all. We heard a lot of good ideas. Not all of them will work everywhere for everyone.
If you're here and over the last day and a half you've heard a lot of things that are new to you and the discussions are new to you, it means that you could be a great representative to this whole untouched community that simply hasn't been aware of what's going on in undergrad chem education.
Great, thank you. Joe?
A clear focus for all of the students who come into chemistry, that they walk out the door understanding the process of science rather than just the facts of science.
Mm-hmm. Very good, Mark.
I wonder to what extent these methods could be brought to bear to enhance the experience of high school teachers and students.
An increased focus on broad-based adoption of even the simpler things that we know work, so that we increase the learning at all universities.
I think we should certainly be sensitive and aware of the major demographic shifts that have occurred over the last 20 years. And from someone from the fourth, soon to be third most populous state in the country, demographics are not the least of those.
We should proclaim to our students and always remind ourselves that our job is to transform our students from containers of information to creators of knowledge.
I want the best for my students, and I'm very excited to experiment with some of the great ideas that I've heard. But if the ultimate solution involves one that minimizes personal, meaning face-to-face interaction, perfect, but then I'll look for another job.
So I think that we need to keep our eyes on the fact that there's a broad spectrum of different learning goals, some of which can be served by things like MOOCs, but not all. And so the integrative education is still key.
I think on the philosophical level, what we have been talking about over the last 2 days are not new. So my question is that how we can find why we are, 20 years ago, I think this kind of challenging questions already appear, and we're still talking about it in a way, although there are new methods that come up. But I want to see how this community can come up with real actionable proposals that will lead to, in 10 years from now, we are not talking about the same questions and same problems.
Very good. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, I agree with everything that was said. No.
Not fair.
Okay, so I have one sentence, and so I'm just going to focus on one thing, not all the things I could think of, but
I will say that the rapidly increasing tuition rates at MIT are due to renewal of infrastructure, buildings, dorms. It's certainly not increases in faculty salary or staff. In fact, they're constant. And that's why the suggestion that when we need to be efficient, it needs to be efficient use of those facilities. And that's what, through your experience, that sort of thing. That's the origin of those.
Yeah. We leave here with a lot of excitement, but a lot of questions and very few answers. So let's keep being creative and keep experimenting.
Good, Mark.
Most of society's greatest challenges right now are technical, and chemistry has a big part to play in all of it, and problem solving of those kinds of things are the best education. Students will flock to them.
Yeah. Go ahead, you'll get your chance. Last word.
I have the last word, right? Until the application of authentic assessment of all these activities occurs, we won't see broad change.
Very good. Thank you. Thank all of you. Let's thank the panel, please.